Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us today. We broadcast Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. through 11 a.m. Central Time. And if you'd like to call us, if you've got something germane to the discussion to add, 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. And there is a telephone listen line, and it operates live when we are live, so 9 a.m. through 11 a.m. Central Time for USA Prepares, and it's the Global Star Network, and it's 712-770-9418, 712-770-9418. Kyle Harris is with us today, and we're going to be talking about how to do things better. We're going to talk about chainsaws. We're going to be talking about what if people show up. How do you decide who you're going to let in to the tent and who you're not? And I've got a few stories that I'd like to share with you, things that have happened in the last few days, and also tips from the book. Welcome, Kyle Harris.
Good morning, Vince. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, it is. And I was telling Jason, our engineer, that what happens around here at USA Prepares is we get calls. And when I like the person calling, and I like what that person has to say, I often invite them to come on the air again and again and become instructors. And what I was referring to specifically was your wife, you, and it's wonderful. And that's how it happened. Just called in, and I liked you guys separately, and then I found out that you were roommates.
Yeah.
And that's how it happened. And I want to thank you for that. So we're going to talk about chainsaws. Where do you want to start, Kyle?
Well, let's start with chainsaws, and then the second half of this program, and maybe into the next one, because I don't know if we're going to get through it. I'd like to really consider what kind of let's just assume for at the second half that the Schumer and the Pelosi really hit the fan, and it's we really have a survival situation. So what are the upsides, downsides of personalities and different things like that? And but the first part, let's start. We kind of touched on chainsaws last time a little bit. I was going to suggest, people need to, in case there's a grid down survival situation, and assuming you can and have got gas that is preserved, which should be a no-brainer, and you have gallons and gallons of bar oil, of two-stroke oil, so that you can run your chainsaws. I was wanting to think in terms of giving people an overview or a thought process of what I've learned about chainsaws and the different cuts on the blades, different maintenance items, different sprockets, and different brands. So anyway, I'll start off with, personally, I burnt up 2 Husqvarnas, and I have 3 Steels that have, one of them I've had for close to 20 years. It's an old 31. It's getting hard to even get parts for it hardly anymore. Then I have an 034 and an 036. I have a friend of mine who is a Husqvarna nut. I should say an acquaintance. Anyway, but he loves Husqvarna saws. The only thing is, he only buys the Pro Saw. And folks, if you're thinking about buying a saw and putting the money out to buy a saw, my opinion is you shouldn't buy anything but the Pro version. They're going to cost you usually $150 more to get a Pro version compared to the regular, homeowner version. But I also think that you should have smaller saws, because the 034 and 036 just limbing trees can get kind of old. I mean, it works real good, and you can get used to it if you're doing it all day long. But my dad used to say, don't ever look a gift horse in the mouth. I have two Poulin, one Poulin Pro. It's called a Pro, but I got it at a garage sale for $15. And I have another one that the guy couldn't get started, and it's a little small Poulin saw that I bought for $5 because the guy couldn't get it started. Well, I have got both of those saws running, and I have used them, both of them, for right at somewhere between 15 and 18 years. And they'll still start up and run like crazy. I've replaced chains on them things probably at least 5 times, if not more. But so if you come across a really good buy on a chainsaw, having more than one and duplicity in these things, don't depend on 1 or 2 items like chainsaws. I would have 3 or 4 or 5 of them. That's my opinion, because that's something you cannot afford to be without, is a way to heat your house. And you better have a way to have wood in the house, a wood heat of some sort, and an access to it, or a whole bunch of it stored up. But in my opinion, that's the way to go. I have a little funny story I'll tell you, Vince, and then I'll let you chime in. So I was at a garage sale, and this guy was leaving the area, and he had in the case, it looked like brand spanking new, the chain and everything, a little tiny home-like saw, and it was a small one. I thought, man, just perfect for a limbing. And he said, well, I haven't started that thing in years. And he didn't even say how long. And I said, well, how much do you want for it? He said, well, I'm leaving. He says, $5. So this is a true story. I paid $5 for that saw, brought it home, got it running, which it didn't take nothing to get it running. But I noticed trying to cut through, it was so weak that trying to cut through even like a 4-inch little limb, it would just bog down. It was just gutless. It was terrible. So I thought to myself, I just don't want to deal with this. It's not worth dealing with, but the thing looked brand new. So I stuck it in a paper for $100. And somebody bought that thing within the first 30 minutes that the paper came out, literally. I mean, it was gone instantly. All right, because they just wanted a little saw for camping. That's all they were going to do with it. And I thought that's fine. That'll work great for that, but not for how much I want to use it. And wouldn't you know, now I had $5 into $100. And I come the very next weekend, I hit another garage sale, and I found a little steel MS 170. And it ran like a top, but you could tell it had some use to it. It was not new. The chain was about half gone, but it looked like the original chain. So I figured, well, this hasn't got a ton of ton of use. And so I asked the guy how much he wanted for it, and he said $125. And I thought, well, for a little 170, that's probably a little much. And so I offered him 100. And it come back to 100. He said, I'll take 110. And he just did not want to let go of it, and it was really in nice shape. So I was willing to do that. So basically, I ended up with $15 in this Stihl MS-170, and that was about 3 years ago, and it's still going strong. Works perfect, does the limbing, cuts through 4 inches worth of wood like it hardly ain't even there. So that's just my thoughts on what some of the things that I have seen about the saws. We can go into the cut on the blades and stuff like that after you comment on what you've got, because I know you probably got something.
Well, I find our discussions fascinating, and we have never talked about what saws we have. I did mention that we have Husqvarna, and I don't like them. And we've got a couple of them. But let me just tell you which saws we have, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. So we have a McCulloch Timber Bear, which is kind of a heavy saw, a lot of torque, lower RPM. I like it, but it's heavy. It's an older saw, probably, maybe 30 years old. And we have two Husqvarna's rancher size, and I hate them. And I hate them because of the company. What they've done is Husqvarna makes a plastic case, and this is considered a farm-type saw. So it's not like the homeowner's model that gets used maybe every couple of years. This is one that's designed to be used way more often. Well, the case, that the handle, the hand grip, the case for the engine, it's actually called a crank case, believe it or not. It's all plastic. All plastic. And ours broke. Now, what does it take to get a new case? This plastic housing that holds the engine and the bar, about a couple $100. About half the price of the saw for this injection molded plastic piece. And so here we are. We've got extra parts, extra chains, extra bars, extra everything. We must have 40 chains for this particular size bar that fits on the Husqvarna saw. And the dilemma is, do we buy another one of these junky saws, or do we just cut our losses and go right to the Stihl? And that's Stihl, pronounced Stihl. So what do we have? We have one McCulloch, a larger saw for the farm. We have a couple Husqvarna ranch-type saws for the farm. We have a Stihl limbing saw, and we have a Homelight limbing saw, 5 saws. So we're not in a contest, Kyle and I, but what we're telling you is this lifestyle requires this number of saws. That's what it does. And what do we have for bar and chain oil? Gallons. Why? Because we know we're going to use it. We know we're going to need it. We heat with wood, and without a chainsaw, it's going to be really cold around here. No kidding. Really cold. Because if you try to cut wood with an axe, if you try to split wood with an axe, if you try to cut wood with a handsaw, you're going to give up really soon. Really soon. We'll be right back. Kyle and I are talking about chainsaws right now, and we're talking about that there is a difference between the homeowner's chainsaw and one that would be used on a farm, to cut enough wood to actually heat your house. And you mentioned Poulin, and you mentioned pro saws. Now, I think the term pro is carelessly used, because I did have a Poulin Pro, and that thing I don't think lasted 30 days. And it was called a Poulin Pro, and I went to the poulinpro.com website, and they've got this guy. He's got a face guard on. It looks like he's got a helmet on. He's got earmuffs on. He's got gloves on. And he's got a crossbuck to saw a piece of wood. And what is the piece of wood? Well, it looks like it's about 4 or 5 inches in diameter. So I would consider that, a saw that I'd use a limbing saw on that rather than a big saw. And so here's this guy all dressed up. And if you look at the reviews on the Poulin Pro, One of them has 3 stars out of 5. Another one has 2 stars out of 5. I think they were pretty generous based on my experience. What happened with us is we found out the engine wore out very, very quickly, including, using the correct oil mixed with the gasoline, and the bar wore out very quickly. So that was my experience with Poolin Pro, and I didn't get it for a few dollars. I paid more than that for it, but I was really disappointed as compared with Husqvarna. I think is way better, and I don't even like them. So I don't. In my opinion, the Poolin Pro does not hold a candle to the steel. Do you feel differently
totally
or
agree.
the same about that?
No, I totally agree, Vince. I wasn't necessarily promoting Poolin. I have a couple of, I didn't even cover this, but I have a couple of McCulloughs as well. And they're older saws, real old. And they I use more than the Poolin. I was kind of using the Poolin example as if you see one at a garage sale and it's in good shape for $5 or $10 or something along those lines, and it runs. Mm-hmm. It might not hurt to have it as something as a backup. I wasn't promoting Poolin because I agree with you. I don't think they build very good saws. McCullough, on the other hand, is a cheaper saw, but they also, I have used both of those, one real smaller McCullough and the one with about a 18-inch bar on it. And it's more of a limbing saw as well. And I have used them for limbing until I got this little MS-170 steel. I used them all the time for limbing. But I was using the Poolin not as an example of necessarily one that you need to use all the time, because I don't think they are. But again, like I said, looking a gift horse in the mouth is to look and see what kind of condition his teeth are in when you're getting it for free. So if you find a Poolin at a garage sale and it runs for $5, it might be the difference later on if you store it correctly and don't use ethanol gasoline and use some kind of a really good preservative like Seafoam or PRI products in your gasoline, or drain it completely. Better yet, run it dry and store it correctly. It might be something in a pinch that might save your life.
Absolutely agreed. No question about it. But the bottom line is, if you had to stake your life on a Poolin, I wouldn't be all that interested if I had other options like a steel. I think from my experience, the steel is the go-to saw. If you're going to buy one and you're going to depend on it, that would be a steel. And you might want to, believe it or not, you might want to buy one a little bit bigger than you think you might need, because a little saw is little in every way. The sprockets, the chains, the bar, the engine, everything is smaller. And so a larger saw will generally last longer doing the same job as compared with a smaller saw. That's how
absolutely
I look at it.
True.
But don't keep them where there's a lot of moisture and the chain is going to start rusting and the bar is going to start rusting. And I think you'll enjoy it, but you need to be really careful with the chainsaw. Make sure you wear hearing protection. Make sure you wear eye protection. Make sure you wear gloves. Don't wear loose-fitting clothes. And they've got this guy standing there in baggy pants at the PoolinPro.com website. This is how you do it. He's got a shirt that's untucked. He's got baggy pants on. We're talking about chainsaws. In class, there's a lot of lessons to be learned here. I have a friend from Virginia. His name is Ashley, and he is an auctioneer. And one day I asked him, so this was probably close to 20 years ago. So Ashley, how's the auction business? And here's what he said. He said, Vinny, good stuff sells good. Junk is always junk. So when you consider a chainsaw, if you don't recognize that name, it's probably not too good. So here's a couple thoughts. Here's what I found. Now, this is what goes wrong with our chainsaws. Over time, the carburetors fail. Now, what we try to do is when we're done using the chainsaw, we will pour out the fuel, run the engine until all the fuel has been consumed. No fuel in the carburetor left. And that makes it, it's great for winterizing. That's the same thing you do with not only a chainsaw, but a weed whacker, a high-pressure washer, a lawnmower, same thing, okay? Because the fuel generally has ethanol, alcohol in it, and it is hydroscopic, so it draws moisture in. And the aluminum parts in the carburetor, in the fuel system, corrode. And now, because our government has decided that you need to have alcohol in the fuel, the carburetors, fuel injection systems, we're having all kinds of problems. Motorcycles, all these gasoline-powered devices are susceptible to problems. So what does it cost? Well, during the break, I went to eBay, and I'm seeing, well, here's one guy that sold 1,292 carburetors. Another guy sold 1,279. Another guy sold 261. And so these are being sold by the hundreds, if not the thousands. A lot of carburetors are being sold. Now, the carburetors probably, if you have good compression, if you pull that handle and you can feel the resistance as the piston goes up toward the compression stroke, if the compression is good, the problem is generally either the spark or the carburation. So if you buy a carburetor, what does that cost? Well, an entire kit shipped to you with shipping included. If you have a Craftsman, a typical Craftsman chainsaw, $11.58. Now, what do you get? Well, you get the spark plug, a carburetor, a complete carburetor, an in-tank fuel filter, carburetor gaskets, and an air filter, and shipping, $11.58. Now, what would a Husqvarna cost? Well, same thing, same contents, fitting a Husqvarna chainsaw, a typical one, $11.45. So what I'm saying is, for around $12, you can probably fix your chainsaw. Probably. Okay? And how long does it take? It might take you a half an hour if you've never done it before. Kyle, have you replaced carburetors and spark plugs, for that kind of money and fixed your saws?
I have, you know what, Vince? Many years ago, I ran into, by kind of happenstance, one of the sales reps for Seafoam. And first of all, I got to back up just a minute. I never run ethanol gasoline in anything that's two-stroke or a small four-stroke, even like for my four-wheeler or for any four-stroke engines other than cars, because we can still buy non-ethanol premium around here. Anyway, back to the Seafoam. So I ran into this rep and I asked him, because I'm pretty, pointed when it comes to those kind of questions. I said, so what's the reality of this stuff preserving this junk gasoline we have now? And he said, well, this is his words to me. He says, we have tested it to 4 years, but we advertise 2. And so I said, so what about storing it in a chainsaw or something like that? He said, it'll keep the gas good for plumb through the winter, he said, and he said it'll work fine. So at the time, I had a Husqvarna. Okay, it was not the one that went bad on me a long time ago, or either one, but it was another one that I had at the time. And so I tried it. I decided to put this gasoline. I put 1 ounce per gallon of the Seafoam in the premium gas, and I left it all winter long. I didn't even fire it up. I wanted to see what was going to happen, and because the guy seemed like he wasn't trying to sell me anything, because he was selling wholesale to the parts stores. So the next year I came back to it, and I thought, well, I'll just fire this thing up and see what's going to happen. And I literally choked it and pulled it about 4 times, and it fired right up like it was downtown Phoenix. and never that saw in particular. It got broke. I'll just put it that way. It was a bad experience using a friend of mine helping me. But anyway, that saw ran great. Now I will say this: the two Husqvarna ranchers that I had did not handle even that. They just one of them burnt the rings out. But my steels, I have been using, like I said, the same steels for one of the 034 I've had for probably 15 years, and the 036 I've had for at least 13 years. And I store them with premium gas in them, and I put the seafoam in the gas and leave it in there, and they fire up and run all the time. Excellent. They've given me no trouble whatsoever. Having said that, if I lived in an area where I could not get non-ethanol gasoline and I had to run ethanol in them, I guarantee you there wouldn't be anything stored anywhere, anytime with ethanol in it. It is a plague as far as I'm concerned. I hate ethanol gasoline.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. Absolutely agree with you. And class, here's something else. Since we're telling you what our experiences are with Husqvarna, I was livid about this crankcase being so expensive to fix the broken plastic. Can't use the saw without this plastic case that surrounds the engine. And so I contacted. I'll just call Husqvarna. You can't call them. All you can do is send them a message, and you can describe what's going on. So I send them a message. We'll get right back to you. Well, I guess that's relative because it took 2 weeks. 2 weeks. So I would never buy another Husqvarna product, no matter what, because the parts are ridiculously expensive for what they are, and you can't get support from the manufacturer. 2 reasons why I won't buy a Husqvarna product. No product. Now, they've been around for a long time. It's a really old company. Hundreds of years old. I have a Husqvarna rifle. That was before, I guess, the new management took over and destroyed the company. But I've got a Husqvarna 30-06 built in the 1950s, and it's probably the most accurate rifle we have. Absolutely magnificent. But that was then. And now we have the new marketeers and the accountants helping the company figure out that, well, chainsaws are disposable, and we can use plastic to hold the key components together. Here's another little tip. We have had these go bad, and it's probably because of ultraviolet light from the sun, probably because of the fuel. And they have if you have a chainsaw or a weed whacker, lightweight 2-cycle engine device, they have these primer bulbs, and these are little things you push with your thumb, and you move fuel from the fuel tank by pushing this bulb. It's like a small thimble, but it's kind of a clear, flexible plastic. You push it with your thumb, and it draws fuel from the tank in and pushes it toward the carburetor. And you do that until fuel flows without air in it. It's a common thing, but they break. So what do? Well, if you have a couple of these devices, these primer bulbs come in 2 typical sizes. One is the small one's 19 millimeter, and the larger one is 22 millimeter. Now, what do they cost? Well, I don't know what they cost if you buy them locally, but if you buy them directly from China on eBay, you can get 10 of them for $2.12 shipped. Now, if you were going to ship them yourself across the street, it would cost more than $2.12 for postage.
Yeah.
So I suggest if you have this, we have them. We have both sizes, and we bought them for about that price. And so we keep them in Ziploc plastic bags so they don't deteriorate before we use them. We try to keep everything in Ziploc-type plastic bags that, might deteriorate from rust and moisture. And we've got lots of spare parts here at the farm because we know they're going to go bad. We just don't know exactly when. Now, it's going to take a couple weeks to get these parts from China, but I think you'll be quite impressed. And since we're talking about that, let me just switch gears for just a second. Yesterday in the U.S. mail, I received the headlight lens covers for my old 1996 Mercedes-Benz diesel. Straight diesel, not turbo. It's an E300. And it's the finest car I've ever owned. It gets on the road 47 miles to the gallon. It's magnificent. And it's got close to 1/3 miles on it. It's impressive. It's Spartan. There's nothing fancy about it. The whole thing cost me $3,000. It had tires on it and wheels and a steering wheel and seats and windows and everything. $3,000. And it's my go-to car. I just love it. Well, what I found was the headlights got more and more opaque. And they're the originals from 1996. So I bought them on eBay. And I want to tell you there's a trick to this. You can buy the whole headlight assembly, and you can spend $100 or even more, depending on the make and model of your particular vehicle. And you can spend up to $400 each for a headlight assembly. What I did was I found that I could buy just the clear lens and keep my housing. So keep the original Mercedes housing and just the clear lens. And I got them for about $50. Shipped. $50 shipped from China. And they look magnificent. So I just wanted to share with you that you can buy, it's going to come from China anyway. So you can buy it directly from China, or you can buy it from some guy in the United States who bought it from China. It's coming from China. So you might want to get it directly yourself and cut out the middleman, because frankly, the Finelli family is no longer loyal to any corporation, because we have been cheated, lied to over the years, and we've just had it. So we're going to do what's best for us, and we don't care about loyalty. Now, we do care about loyalty at USA Prepares with people who we really like. We are absolutely loyal there. But to corporations that sell us defective products, nah, we're not loyal to them. Kyle, any quick comments before we go into our next break?
No, we'll just pick up the chainsaw angle on the other side.
Yeah, we'll talk about the angle of the chain and how you can alter that and get bigger and better cuts and why you should consider it and the risks. We'll be right back. Kyle's with us, and we're talking about chainsaws. And Kyle has some more to tell you about the chain, the angle of the cut, and some thoughts he has. Kyle, please continue.
If you think of the cutting surface of a chainsaw chain, if you think of it in terms of being almost straight across, that's a very short little cut. If you increase that angle, the cutting surface increases. And you will notice that right in front of the chain, of that little cutting part, there is a guide, a little lip that looks almost like a picture of a wave that when they're making white caps. Anyway, that is your raker. And so the further if you file that raker down, the bigger the cut you're going to have into the wood. But if you take that raker down too much, you will be cutting wood. Your saw will be under a major strain to be able to do that. And if you're cutting hardwood, you will probably be burning your chain up really quickly. There's a fine balance of learning exactly how to do that, and most chainsaw companies sell gauges. They will sell you a file gauge that will give you an angle that in their opinion is the correct angle, kind of in between hardwood, softwood, gives you the correct angle to be able to do both of those adequately. And then they will give you a raker gauge that will go across the top of the chain and give you give you a really close actual measurement of how far down the raker should be taken. With most people, I mean virtually all of them, I highly suggest you just follow the the saw's recommendations for what angle and how deep to file off the raker. If you ever get into the point to where you buy like a Haddon lumber maker or one of these other ones, and you decide to rip and make your own lumber, if you get down to that point, you can change the sprocket size on the front of your saw smaller and change the angle on your the blade of your saw and rip lumber. You can actually rip 2x2 slab out of a log if you have it, but that's for people that really either have learned the hard way or have the time and the inclination to try to do that. I'm just throwing that out there for an idea on what you might end up at some point in your life, if the Schumer hits the fan, might need to do if you've got the wherewithal to do it. Your thoughts, Vince?
Well, yeah, I agree with that. And there are a couple other things to consider. One is chainsaw sharpening. So if you go to the local hardware store, they might have a guy who sharpens chainsaws, and typically they cost about $3 to sharpen. At least they did around here the last several years when I saw a guy bring their saw chain in. And I couldn't understand why anybody would have someone else sharpen their chain for their chainsaw, because the price of a new chain is about, let's say, $20. So if you sharpen it yourself, it only takes a few times to pay for the chain if you sharpen it yourself. And if you sharpen it yourself and you learn how to do it, you're probably not going to do what that quote-unquote professional would do. Because here's what he would do. He would say, well, I want this to be really sharp, so I'm going to take off enough material off the chain, off each cutter, so that it's really sharp. When we sharpen chains, we say, what is the absolute minimum that we can take off? Because if we take off the minimum each time, we'll get to sharpen that chain more times, and it'll last way longer. And another thing is, if you have the chain sharpened quickly, and they're in a hurry, what happens is they use a grinding wheel, a specially curved grinding wheel on a machine that, like an Oregon or another brand, that will sharpen the chain. And what happens is, if you do it too quickly, that grinding wheel against that small piece of steel will overheat it, and it will lose its temper, and it will become weaker and softer and wear out faster as you use the chain to cut. And once that happens, it's very, very difficult to retemper it. Practically, it's never done. So what you've done is you've gotten your chain cut so that it won't last as long because more metal's removed. And the guy might probably have overheated the chain so it's lost its temper, so it won't last as long. So the bottom line is you got to do it yourself, kind of like changing your oil in your vehicle. And Kyle, let's talk a little bit about the different types of ways of sharpening that chain. You can use that round hand file, specifically designed and sized for each type of chain. You can learn the angle. You can do it yourself for just a few dollars for the file. You can get a diamond or a stone that goes on a Dremel, or you can buy a more of a professional chainsaw sharpener with a wheel. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Kyle Harris is with us, live in Montana, and we're talking about chainsaws, and there's a lot to think about. And to cut to the chase, avoid the cheap brands. If you can buy one used and it's got good compression and it looks like the bar's good, the chain's good, and it was well taken care of, you might want to consider that. But if you don't know about them, that's a risky thing to do. But I've done it, Kyle's done it, and it's worked out for us. But be prepared to replace the carburetor and maybe the primer bulb and maybe the bar. But look at the bar and see if it's worn out. And the way you look at that is you look at the groove in the center of the bar that the chain rides through. And if it is peened over, that means that the bar has had lots of use and maybe not enough oil. So one thing you need to look at or consider when you have a chainsaw is the bar oil, which Kyle mentioned in hour number one. And there's all kinds of bar oil. Some has been used engine oil, and it's black, like diesel engine oil, filthy black, and it's sold as bar oil. Other bar oil would be virgin oil, and it's, nice and kind of a tan color, and it has an additive called tack, as in tacky. And the idea is that it has this additive that prevents it from being slung off the bar quickly. So it stays on the bar and lubricates better. So you might want to consider having some bar and chain oil. And where do we get ours? Well, we think that the brand that SuperTech sold by the Chinese factory outlet in gallons for less than $10 a gallon, that seems to work for us. Kyle, your thought on bar oil?
Agreed. Totally, Vince. You and I usually think right along the same lines. SuperTech is fine for bar oil. I will say this, folks, if you are in a Schumer hit the fan scenario, and for some reason you have a chainsaw and you have gasoline, but you do not have bar oil, if you used motor oil is better than no oil, because you absolutely will burn up your chain and nothing flat. So I'm talking about super critical situations, okay, super critical, where you don't have anything. Better to have used motor oil in that chainsaw to run through it than nothing. But you should prepare now. That's what this is all about, is preparing. I think I probably have at least 6 gallons of bar oil sitting in my shop right now. And I have probably 3 gallons of in smaller containers, but probably 3 gallons of the 2-stroke motor oil. That will last me for years. Just because I know that I'm going to cut up probably in the neighborhood of 5 to 7 cord a year, depending on what I've got to go through. And in that scenario, I know that amount will get me through 3 or 4 years, and I'll be able to barter, trade, or something along those lines to get more eventually, Lord willing. Okay, but let's jump to the sharpening the saw, because I really want to get to the personality thing that we were talking about. I've been thinking about this a lot. But so with the saw, with the files, should you buy an electric one if you can find one cheap somewhere? Should you have files? Should you figure this stuff out? If you can't find somebody to actually show you how to sharpen a chainsaw, go on YouTube and work with it and use it and learn from it. Learn what works, what don't work, before you end up in a scenario where you have to depend upon it. I have all of it. Finally, I found one I mentioned at another show. I found a little electric one. And it took some tweaking to get this thing so that it would do exactly what I wanted it to do. I had to shim some of the little adjustment things in order to get it to do exactly what I wanted. But I know from years and years of experience of doing this what I want in a chainsaw blade, what I want it to do, and how I want it to cut in order to handle the type of wood that's everything from pine to larch, softwood to hardwood that's around here. And so I took some tweaking and I figured this little electric saw out, or the sharpener, and it just works like a charm. And exactly like Vince said, if you go really slow when you come down to that blade and it's got the angle you want, the first thing you want to do is find the smallest tooth that's on your saw, because you want them to all be equal. So then you take the smallest tooth, you adjust to that one so that you can sharpen it just a little tiny bit and go very slow when you get to it. It literally will take me probably 2 seconds from the time I reach the edge of that little blade until I drop it down to where I bottomed out. I go very slow. If you go really, which you can go really fast, you can probably do it in half a second. But just like Vince said, it will heat that steel up and temper it, take the temper out of it. So then all of your blades are equal. So that's really important for your saw. Not if you have one side that's not correct and say it's bigger than the other side, you'll notice some teeth are one direction and some are the other direction. It causes your saw to start cutting at an angle when you get into the bigger ones. The other thing that will cause your saw to cut at an angle like that is, like Vince said, if the bar itself is wore out or you get it too loose inside there so that it's not nice and tight. Your saw should have just a little tiny bit of tension when you tighten it up so that you can pull it down. It should not be super, super tight. It just should have, in my opinion, it just should have just a little bit of tension and not be hanging down off of the bar. Your thoughts, Vince?
Total agreement. And here's one other thing, and this has to do with timing. So lots of people are lazy, and they'll say, well, let's cut the tree down, and, it's kind of hot, and we'll come back to it later, and then we'll saw it up into logs. Well, if you wait too long, that tree will begin to lose its moisture, and it will become harder and harder and harder to cut. As a matter of fact, when we lived in Virginia, we had hickory kitchen cabinets. And they were seasoned for, 10, 15 years. And you cannot drive a nail into hickory that is dried out. Impossible. And if you want to put a nail in, you're first going to have to drill a hole as deep as you want that nail to go in order to put a nail in hickory. Same thing with oak. So the hardwoods heat the best. But if you wait too long, if you cut that tree down and you wait too long, you're going to create more wear on the chainsaw, the saw itself, the engine, the sprockets, and the bar. So my advice is to, if you cut it down, if you have to cut a tree down, which I don't like doing, but let's say it was damaged somehow, and you're going to cut it up for firewood to make the best use out of it, cut it soon, preferably that day, because it has the most moisture in it. It's the softest, and the moisture will help cool the chain, which actually gets kind of hot sometimes, and the bar gets kind of hot. So everything will last longer and be easier on you than if you wait and wait and wait. If you wait a year, you're going to probably do multiple times the damage to your chainsaw, accelerate the wear multiple X than if you cut it right away. You agree with that, Kyle?
Absolutely. And, if I have most all of my wood completely cut up before summer starts, because if I cut into some and it's kind of green, or if it's a little drier or wetter, greener than I want, I will throw it out and I won't stack it. I will throw it out where it's going to get direct sunlight for all summer long. And by the end of the summer, if you cut it and split it, because I'll split it up as well if it's very big, I'll lay it out in the sun, and the sun will just dry it out really nice, and then it's ready to go. But what do you think, Vince, let's jump into the scenario, kind of leave chainsaws and jump into the scenario of the personalities how personalities are going to interact with, in case there is a place or a time where you have to congregate together.
All right, let's start with an example. Okay, so I've never met Kyle, and I've never met his wife. But if you've listened to this broadcast class with the two of us on the air, or Kyle's wife and me, what you'll hear is we think quite in the same line of thinking. I mean, we have the same values. I would, without having ever met Kyle, welcome him into our tent. No question about it. I really mean that. And that's because we look at things the same way. I actually, without having met Kyle, I believe that if we were in the same tent, what I'm saying is we're making a stand together, his family and our family. And we have a meeting, and we say, okay, so we've got 4 corners of the property. We need 4 guards. I know for a fact, without ever having met Kyle, that if his job was to be in the north corner to stay watch for 8 hours, he would be there for 8 hours, and I could absolutely depend on him to carry out his duties. And I cannot say that for most people. Now I don't want you to think I'm a dictator, because it would be my turn to be on the north, south, east, and west watch as well. Everybody would be. Everybody would have duties. But what I'm saying is I know that Kyle would carry them out, and I wouldn't have to check up on him. I know that. So, but I can't say that for most everybody else. Is that what we're talking about, Kyle?
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. And as I've thought about this, Vince, I've come up, Sun Tzu has a whole lot of really good stuff to say. One of those is, if you know yourself but you don't know your enemy, you will win half the battles. If you don't know yourself but you know your enemy, you will win half your battles. If you know yourself and your enemy, you will win all your battles. Okay? I expanded on that just a little bit in this way. If you do not understand your alliances and do not know who you are allied with, or you cannot read them and see enough inside of them, you're betting your life on that and your family's life. So I've thought of 3 things that are interesting. One is our criteria, our thought things to think about. Number 1 is responsibility. Number 2 is humility. And number 3 is integrity. If those 3 aspects are not part of a person's makeup,
now, hold that thought. We're going into a break. We're talking about Kyle's law of survival. Number 1, you need to have 3 things to think about: responsibility, humility, and integrity. Kyle, please continue.
Okay, so folks, one of the things that everybody has got to be able to do is look at themselves with brutal honesty. That means your shortcomings and your abilities that you're really good at. Because none of us are the sharpest knife in the drawer. We all have certain liabilities as part of our personality, and we have certain major abilities that are part of our personality. I'm gonna have a little fun right now, and we'll carry this over into the next segment here. But let's just say that the Kyle family has to land on Vince's door and say I didn't bring a whole lot, but I would never show up there without nothing. I would have something, right? And he knows a little bit about my abilities. But the question is, what do I know about Vince? Because I'm putting my family into a situation that would be controlled, for lack of a better term, by Vince's ideas and thoughts and his processes. And so I admire him. Let's go this route. I find these are the things I know about Vince. He's very, very intelligent. He has extremely high principles, sometimes to his own detriment. He has an incredible sense of humor. He is a little on the OCD side about fixing and keeping track of things. Okay? It can have detrimental, how to put this, it can have parts of a personality, the interaction part of Vince in the daily living out of life, that can have a potential for argument or for disagreement. The one biggest thing that Vince has going for him is that he's humble. He doesn't have to jump on being correct all the time. He thinks things through extremely well. I'm a journeyman electrician, but I'll guarantee you if Vince said something to me about something having to do with electronics or even electricity, because I know his personality and what type of a person he is, I would listen intently, because there's a potential there that I don't know it all, and I already know I don't know it all. Okay, so the other thing that Vince, that anybody that you let into your circle needs to have a sense of humor, because that will help them deal with the inadequacies of other people. Now, I want to say that again. A really good sense of humor will help that person deal with the inadequacies of other people, because nobody knows it all. So if I'm coming into Vince's place and say Vince is working on vehicles and I'm working on a vehicle and I'm out there till 10 or 11 o'clock at night and I'm using Vince's tools to work on a vehicle, and I leave the tools out, Vince probably, if it was him, he might put the tools back up. He might be one of these guys. His OCD might kick in, and he might want them all washed and cleaned up and put away. But I might be too tired to be able to finish the project, and I might leave everything set one night. So Vince could either come down on me, make a joke about it if he's got a good sense of humor, or he could realize that, hey, he was out there till 11 o'clock at night, he's exhausted, and I'm not going to even worry about it. We'll pick it up on the other side.
Yeah, and I've got a comment. The more I hear Kyle, the more I realize how close in thinking we really are, if not identical. We'll be right back. It's very interesting what Kyle is bringing up. So, class, you know that we have an automotive shop here at the farm, and we work on tractors, and we work on implements and trucks and cars and all kinds of machinery. And there are late nights. And let's say our son is working late night at night on a tedious, difficult, no-fun repair job. And at the end of that frustrating long day, he's exhausted. He works till he's exhausted. And there are parts all over the bench. There's sockets and ratchets and extensions and screwdrivers and hammers and saws and cotter pins and washers and bolts. I mean, everywhere, all over the surface of the bench and the surface of the toolbox, which is a flat, roll-around toolbox. And what do? And cat litter's on the floor. We use cat litter or oil absorb to pick up, spills of transmission fluid. So that's on the floor, too. And what do? Well, before the broadcast, I go out in the shop. Anything I can do? Okay, good. I clean up the tools. I wipe them down with a rag, put them all in the respective drawers in the toolboxes. I sweep up the cat litter into a pile, and we use it and use it and use it over and over again to clean up, bigger and bigger spills until it can't absorb any more oil. Then it goes in the wood stove for heat, and then it goes in the driveway. And do I say anything? No. I don't need to say anything. I don't need to say, yo, wait, hey, look, all these tools all over. Come on. I don't do that, because when he goes out to the shop the next day, he sees that all the tools are put away. And, he'll say, hey, thanks for putting tools away. So am I annoyed with him? Absolutely not. Now, if one of our family were to leave those tools out in the rain, it would be a different story. It would be something like, what's the matter with you? But that's never happened.
Right.
So that's my answer to what you were saying.
Yeah, exactly. So there's things that you notice when I said responsibility, humility, and integrity, there's not any mention of a proficiency in a particular skill. Because if you are responsible and humble and you have integrity, you will have some kind of a proficiency in some kind of a skill. You might not be a master at it, but you will have something. So if somebody comes to me, wants to come into our group, say, and they can't bring anything other than I'm really good at video games, they're not coming in. I'm not wasting my my efforts in my preparedness on someone that has wasted their life on something so foolish. I'm just not going to do it. I'm sorry for them, but I'm not going to. My family is going to survive first. And so, anyway, I'm throwing these ideas out there for you folks as in something to consider. If you bring in somebody that is not responsible, that is willing to leave tools out in the rain, that same person is not going to take care of cleaning their rifle or making sure that their rifle is functional and ready to use it if they have to, when they have to go to the four corners of the property to guard for the night. And that could end up getting them killed and then getting you killed. So there's humility. If you've got somebody that has to, as soon as they think they know something, they're ordering everybody else around like they've mastered it with arrogance or with, just the stupidity of having to argue for the sake of argument. That's somebody that will cause more trouble in your group than you will ever fathom. You do not want that in your group. The other part there is in integrity. If you cannot trust that person to have his particular share of the food or the water and take no more, that this is the rations that we're on, then you're dealing with a situation that's putting the entire group at peril. So these are things that I've been considering and thinking about for quite a while, and I just wanted to bring it up and get Vince's thoughts on it as well, and throw it out there for people to consider.
I think you've said a tremendous amount with very few words that should cause people to think. And so, class, here's some homework. Kyle and I have not talked about this, but tonight I'd like to assign homework, if you choose to accept the assignment. Have dinner as a family. Turn the television off. Put the cell phones away. Just you and your family sitting around the kitchen table and talk about, so if we have to gather our resources, since no one has everything, and we want to work with the neighbors, who would we trust? Who would we be able to work with? Who do you think would fit and not be in constant argument with us? Who would that be? I think you should consider talking about that, as well as what tools do we have and what tools do we need? And as we are advancing toward a massive conflict with terrorism potential on the United States soil with the Middle East, I think you need to consider, what tools do you need? Do you need a rifle, pistol, shotgun? Do you need saws? Do you need chainsaws? Do you need fuel? Do you need to move out of wherever you are, out of that apartment, and move to the countryside? There are a lot of things to talk about, and I suggest you start talking about them. And let me give you an example of something that happened to me recently, in the last couple of days. So I went to the Restore. I wanted to, and I'm interested in things that I can find there that I can use that are not expensive. Sometimes they have tools. Sometimes they have books. Sometimes they have electrical parts. Well, the last time I was there, which was very recently, I found two single-gang electrical box covers. So these would be like switch plates, but without the hole for the switch, or receptacle cover plates without the holes for the receptacles. Just a blank panel with two screw holes. And the reason is I've got circuits in the house, a UPS circuit that has wires inside the box with no cover. But I thought I want to put one on there, and I don't want to spend several dollars. So I was able to find them for 15 cents a piece at the Restore. And then they had insulation. It's a rubberized insulation or rubber insulation that goes over the hard lines of a central heating and air conditioning system. You know, the outside copper pipes get insulated, and it deteriorates in the sun. So I found two pieces for $1 a piece, and the cover plates for 15 cents a piece. So I went to the checkout, and it's two steps. One, you have somebody look at the item and write down the receipt or the items to be paid for, and then you go a few steps forward, and then you pay for it. Another person. So the gal who was helping me was at the same desk as, we'll call him the manager. The manager looks over at the gal, and I said, so who will be helping me? And the manager says, she will. So she's looking at these things, trying to figure out what these cover plates are. She can't figure it out. He says, they're single gang cover plates. So she looks up, she says, they're 50 cents. And he says, no, they're 15 cents. And then she looks at the pipe insulation, of which there are two 3-foot sections or so, and she's trying to figure out what that is. And then I said, so how long have you been here? And she said, well, community service. So she said, they should be paying me to be here, to work here. And I looked at the manager, and I looked at her, and I said, well, maybe they will when you know what you're doing. True story. So now, why did I mention that? Because this gal has no clue. Would I let her in the tent? Absolutely not. You know, I would be able to, I'd be willing to give her directions. Like, okay, so you know how you came in here? Well, you just go out the same way you came in, turn left, and keep going. And there'll be people down there that'll help you. That would probably be the advice I'd give her. I would not let her in the tent because she has no skills and she can't be trusted. She doesn't know anything. And she thinks she deserves to be compensated for not knowing anything. You can't let those people in the tent. I'm sorry to say it. They may be really nice, you know, before they were felons or before they were arrested and sentenced with community service. We're talking about people who broke the law. That's what we're talking about. So, Kyle, you hit a really, really good point. And I around here, I would be, oh boy, would I be challenged if someone said, I'll tell you what, we'll give you $1 million, an enormous amount of money, but you got to come up with 10 people who you absolutely trust. Boy, there goes the $1 million.
All right, yeah. How many's in your family?
Yeah, well, we got a good start with that, but and that's, you know, we have some friends, but and a few would probably, you know, fit the bill, but I don't think I could find 10. Does that sound unreasonable, or does that fit with your thinking too?
Absolutely, Vince. I've looked around and I've thought about this for a long time, and you know, it's going to be. This is hard to say, folks, but unless you are willing to enforce that level of commitment to your family by force or even death, that is something you need to think about. Because if you are not, you might as well take everything that you have prepared for and give it to the first gang of people that show up. Because I guarantee you, there will be groups of 2, 3, or more people in a case like that are going to show up and try to take everything you have prepared for your family. So that's a hard conversation to have. And you do not want to have someone out there on point or on guard that does not have the same mindset and thought process that is really, truly willing to do that. If you don't have that, you are in deep trouble.
Here's an interesting story. So you might have heard Deborah Brewster on the air with us. She lives in Missouri. She used to live in the Southwest. She bought a tract of land in the middle of nowhere in Missouri, and she had a tinfoil hat party. And she invited a whole bunch of people. Some were former USA Prepares meetup types, and some others. So I knew a lot of people there. And Steve Elkins was at the house, and so was John Statmiller. So I asked her if I could bring them with me because I was invited, and she said sure. So we all went to Deborah Brewster and Bill Brewster's home. And when we come back, I want to tell you a little bit about what happened, because this ties with what you're talking about. Kyle Harris. Kyle Harris is with us live in Montana. So Deborah Brewster and Bill Brewster had this party, this event for preparedness-minded people. Now, some of the people that were invited were meetup types from 8 years, 7 years, 6 years, 5 years. So these are people who knew each other for the most part. Not everybody knew everybody, but for the most part, we all knew most of the people there. And I invited John Statmiller and Steve Elkins after I asked Deborah if it'd be okay with her, because John and Steve were staying with us at the farm. And she said that'd be great. So we all went. And one of the things that happened, now these are people who are survival types. I won't say survivalists because that means, something different. And I won't say preppers because I don't like that term. So people who are interested in preparing and surviving. And one of the questions that was asked is, so if someone came up to you and they needed your help, a stranger, would you help them? So everybody was asked a series of questions, and we went round robin and we answered, like 7 questions. And that was one of them. And what was said was very interesting. Well, if they're Christians, they have to be Christians, or I'd say no, we wouldn't be able to help them. I thought that was pretty interesting, because there's lots of different flavors of Christianity. Okay, so that was one thing that kind of raised my eyebrows. Another thing was that depending on their skill set, depending on their mindset, that was interesting too. And in one person, I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I mean, it was, it's like going to a party with a purpose. And if everybody has a chance to speak and describe their thoughts and how they would respond to certain situations, kind of gives you an insight as to who they are. So this is like a party, but it's got meaning. And I thought it was absolutely brilliant, and so did Steve Elkins. We talked about it many, many times, over the course of a year, about what a neat thing to do, how well we received it. But not everybody liked it. There was a statement that wasn't very good. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that is, so how do you let people who think that, talking about preparedness and survival, and inner thoughts, and maybe things that you wouldn't want to say, too publicly, that were, those things were kind of discussed, religion, and, have to be the right religion to be welcomed into the tent. But not everybody thought it was a really great party. I thought it was brilliant. If I had to rank it, it would be in the top 5 events I've ever been to, like a party type thing. Literally, if not number 1. So now you have people who are of the preparedness mindset still not agreeing. Now, how can you have people who've been with you for 5 years who absolutely know who you are and actually don't know who they are? That's the point. You don't know who they are. Kyle?
That's exactly correct, Vince. You don't know who they are until you get down to the core. The other thought on the other side of being or having to be at the point of taking a life is understanding the huge moral and emotional consequences of actually doing it. You have to be able to weigh both of those out carefully and then make a decision and then live with that decision one way or the other. But you need to confront it. You need to talk about it with the people that you are going to be in the foxhole with, for lack of a better term. And just because somebody cannot take a life, if they said, I can't do it, that does not immediately disqualify them from the group. In my opinion, they can peel potatoes in the kitchen, but there are certain things, or they might be okay working in the shop. They might do that, but they absolutely will not be put in a position of responsibility for the lives of the rest of the group.
And here's another thought on the other side of the equation, or the other side of the coin. I know a guy who's a former cop, and years ago I asked him about preparedness, and he said, I don't need to prepare. I got me a gun. And what he's saying is he's just going to take it. So what would you do if he shows up? He's already declared that it's open season. If you've got it and he wants it, he's going to come and take it. Now, what do you do if you need it to survive? And he says, no, you don't understand. I'm taking this. What are you going to do? Absolutely. Now, I'm not trying to pick on the cops. I'm just saying he's a former cop, and that's what he said. If he were a plumber, I'd say he was a plumber, and here's what he said. There's a lot to think about. So, class, homework tonight around the kitchen table. Kyle, any thoughts about homework tonight around the kitchen table? Your few seconds of comments.
You better have a lot of points to ponder, and you better be able to come to a decision.
And even if you have a democracy, somebody's got to be in charge, and somebody's got to make those final hard decisions.
Absolutely.
And you're in it together, or you're not going to survive. It's as simple as that. So I would have a tough time with most millennials. Kyle, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your expertise and knowledge.
My pleasure, Vince.